All right, hello and welcome to this episode. Today is going to be an FAQ or frequently asked questions episode where we're going to talk about the question, why is it so hard for people with OCD to give up listening to our minds, especially when it doesn't give us helpful guidance, answers, or whatever. This is a great question. So before we dive in, those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Codde, and I'm the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. If you could do us a quick favor by liking and subscribing, as well as leaving a nice comment or review on iTunes or Spotify, that would be very helpful, and I'd be much appreciated if you would take the time to do so. Also, if you're looking for support or guidance on your journey and you're struggling with OCD, anxiety, panic, things in the psychological stress spectrum, please head over to restoredminds.com. Again, we have several resources for you. And again, things that actually, can really be game-changing guidance and advice as far as reclaiming your life. And this is something that you can recover from. So please don't just continue to stay in the loop if you're struggling, and really reach out. So, and you can do that over at restoredminds.com. So let's get back in the episode. So why is it so hard for people with OCD to give up listening to the mind when it doesn't offer any helpful guidance or really direction? So this is a great question. So I guess to dissect the question a little bit, number one, I would let go of, for me, I would let go of the label of people with OCD, because this is insinuating the idea that, like, number one, I have OCD. There's really that identification underneath that of, like, I have OCD and this is why it's difficult. Whereas you being caught in the mind is what's really creating these loops, right? So, and so it's a chicken and egg thing, right? OCD is causing me to be engaged with the mind. It's like, no, you being engaged in the mind is what's causing OCD, right? So that little reframe there, I think, is important because it's really understanding what the problem is. So, and when it comes to being caught in the mind, what most people don't, it's important to understand is, like, this is what most people just do, right? It's not even people with OCD. It's just the average person is just caught in their mind. And so, this is why, like The Power of Now from Eckhart Tolle, Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul, probably countless other books as well from various authors that talk about this idea of the ego and how the ego is the cause of all the problems. And then you go into the Sedona method, and you go into, works of Lester Levinson and Hale Dwoskin, I believe. And then obviously Dr. Hawkins with most of his work, right? Letting Go being probably my favorite of his work that I've read thus far, but also Power versus Force and, transcending the levels of consciousness. Point being is the ego is the cause of essentially every problem in life, because thinking is what actually creates the suffering. So, and the reason that is because oftentimes we're experiencing life a certain way. We judge it as we think it should be, even though it's not that way. And then we try to correct life to be a certain way so that it appeases our ego. So let's go ahead and use an example. And again, it's not like I'm beyond this, because this happens to me on a daily basis of getting caught in the mind, right? Maybe even an hourly basis. I don't know. But the work is always, again, getting out of the mind. It's the same work, and really understanding who you are. So the first thing is, the question, one thing I like about the question is, like, give up listening to our minds. There's already this sense of disidentification with the ego, meaning, like, the ego, the mind, is something that I hear, right? And that's like the first step in really understanding this. Most people are so attached to their mind, they just believe it's them. It's just like when you say, like, what's your mind saying? You're like, what you mean? Like, what am I saying? right? Like they're so attached that they don't have any separation. So cultivating that separation is the first step. And in order to do that, we need to acknowledge the presence of really two things. We got the mind and the witness, or the mind and the awareness. And when you start to identify as the awareness, you then begin to understand that you're aware of this mind that's talking. Now, where does the mind come from? Well, in letting go, Hawkins does a great job of explaining how a lot of what the ego is driven from is a lot of emotion that we have. And it goes into some beliefs as well that really create the mind and the ego. But regardless, and this is kind of what Eckhart Tolle talks about in his work as well, where he calls it consciousness. And like I talked about Singer as well with witness consciousness. So a lot of people saying a lot of the same things, just the trick is really saying it in a way where you're trying to not help the ego understand it, but you're trying to help the person really become aware. And that's where a lot of disconnect happens with a lot of this teaching is there's a disconnect because a lot of people are trying to take the reading and really fix the ego from an ego perspective. I hope I'm not getting too caught in the weeds right now with this, but the point I'm making is that the mind, the more emotions we have in our body that are not felt and released, right? The faster the mind generally is going to be, and the more intense it's going to be. So a lot of us, one of the reasons that the mind is so intense is because we don't know what to do with emotions. So, learning how to feel and let go of emotions is a huge part of not getting caught in the mind. Because one of the reasons that we get caught in the mind is usually try to resolve our emotions. Paradoxically, by getting into the mind about them, we're actually suppressing the emotion. Right. So that's why, the first real two steps of AAA response are, disengaging the mind and then ultimately getting aware of what you're experiencing in the body. And so when it comes to the mind, first understanding that the mind is generally a reflection of the emotional state of the person. And then if the mind's going really fast, oftentimes that means there's a lot of stuff going on in here in the body that maybe we're not always aware of, or we're kind of ignoring, or not really giving the full awareness that it deserves to. So one of the reasons it's hard for the mind is because people are really addicted to thinking and addicted to being in the mind. And so first is kind of just noticing that that's what's going on. And then one of the reasons that we're in our mind all the time is because we really are convinced that by thinking and ruminating and analyzing and all this stuff, it's actually helping us stay safe for the most part. That's one of the main reasons that people are in their mind. So they're trying to have conversations before they happen. So they're trying to plan out every conversation that happens. Or they're trying to, control the events of an upcoming situation, or they're reviewing a past situation. And essentially the mind can only exist in the past and future. So it's always taking you to one of those two places. The mind can never really exist about what's happening right now. And that's why, Tolle's book, The Power of Now, that's his big, not to spoil the book, but essentially it's when you're just here, you can't be in the mind. And what the mind's always trying to do is take you to the past and the future. And really seeing the mind as its own force is, I think, so important. And that's kind of what Hawkins talks about, even in the book that I'm reading right now with the Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. And he talks about how, essentially the ego is just trying to get its juice and stay alive, right? And there's so many ways that the mind does that. And, whether it's getting into victim consciousness or, fear or anger or all these lower state emotions is generally what feeds the mind a lot. So that's why getting good at actually getting attuned to what you're feeling and learning how to release those emotions actually is what tends to calm the mind down and really create that space for everyone. Right. So it's a great question. And so to summarize the points, right, letting go of the identification of people with OCD are the ones that get caught in the mind. It's actually flipped, right? Because you get caught in the mind so much, people develop OCD or other, psychological stress, quote unquote, disorders. And then so because of that, and so why do we listen to the mind in the first place? Well, generally it's an escape from emotions, and learning how to feel into what's going on in the body is a really big thing when it comes to actually releasing that and then calming down what's going on in the mind as well. So lots to unpack there. And again, I know I probably didn't do it justice in this one episode, but I wanted to at least take an initial stab at it. And obviously this is stuff we talk a lot about in our coaching programs and TBC. So if you're interested in going deeper on this, you can head over to Restored Minds. You can complete a free application for the program, as well as check out some of the other resources we have for you to expand further on this. So thank you for hanging out today. Wish you guys a great week, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com, as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.